Hi. Today I'm going to talk about the flexibility of selection history. Let's start with an example. Imagine that you are a pilot in this cockpit. An unexpected beep might attract your attention, or you might choose to attend to your co-pilot who asked you a question. But also, if you attend to the altitude meter, it will be easy to return your attention to it in the next few seconds. The fact that a target is easier to find if it appears at the same location as in a previous search is a well-established phenomenon called priming of location. To account for it, Malkovich and Nakayama suggested that when you attend to a location, the priority of that location is automatically boosted, so the next object that appears there is more likely to receive attention. Oops. Okay. And what this implies is that the mechanism that is responsible for location priming is proactive. That is, it enhances a location's priority before the new event occurs, and it is independent of context, which means that it occurs whatever this new event is. And if you think about it, this mechanism is very useful in many real-life scenarios where the environment is stable, as in the cockpit example. It means that you can repeatedly attend to important locations without effort or intention. However, location priming should be counterproductive when the environment constantly changes. For example, at the supermarket, when you move from one aisle to the other, or in virtual environments where you can find yourself in an entirely different task in one click. So the question I'm going to address in my talk is whether location priming is indeed independent of contextual changes, and here I will define context as a task participants are required to perform. I will present 4 experiments. In experiment 1, we examined if a clearly visible change in task influences how much attention goes to the previously selected location. In experiments 2 and 3, we examined if expectation about task changes influence location priming. Finally, in experiment 4, we tested 2 possible mechanisms that might account for the results we got. In experiment 1, we used a variation of the capture-probe paradigm, which is a paradigm that allows us to measure the distribution of attentional priorities. On most trials, participants searched for the diamond target and reported the side of the dot inside it. On a minority of trials, that we call search probe trials, the search display appeared for 60 milliseconds, and then a letter appeared on each item, followed by a short mask. The task of the participants was to report the letters they saw. A previous study by Talcott and colleagues showed that on search trials followed by search probe trials, more letters are reported from the location of the previous target than from other distractor locations, which shows that previously selected locations are prioritized. To examine the role of task change, we introduced a new type of trials. We call them probe trials, where the task was the same as search probe trials, but only the letters appeared without the colored objects. And all trial types were intermixed. So what's our prediction? We compare sequences where a search trial was followed by a search probe trial, relative to when a search trial was followed by a probe trial. In the two conditions, participants report letters, so we look at exactly the same measure. On search probe trials, participants don't know during the first 60 milliseconds that the task and context will soon change. But on probe trials, the change is immediately clear. So here we can test whether a clearly visible task change influences location priming. Again, the location priming effect is the percentage of letters reported from the previous target minus the percentage of letters reported from other distractor locations. If location priming is sensitive to a clearly visible task change, the effect should be smaller on probe trials than on search probe trials. And if location priming is 100% predictable, the effect should be similar in the 2 conditions. This is exactly what we found. Location priming was equally strong in the 2 conditions, and we replicated the pattern of result in another experiment where search was easy. In an exploratory analysis, we also looked at the reverse sequence. What happens when a probe trial is followed by a search trial? The idea was that although the probe task doesn't require search, in order to select a letter, my attention must have been there. So if location priming occurs even when the task changes, we should be faster to find a target when it appears at a previously reported location than elsewhere. This is exactly what we found, an advantage of 70 milliseconds. So should we conclude that location priming is entirely inflexible? If you think about it, in many real-life scenarios, we know in advance that our task is going to change. So our next question was, if I know that my task will change, do I still attend to the previously selected locations? We manipulated task expectations in 2 experiments. Now, recall that in experiment 1, the most frequent task was to search. So it is reasonable to assume that before a probe trial, participants actually prepared to a search trial. In experiment 2, the probe task was now the most frequent task. So we predicted that after a search trial, participants would prepare for a letter report task. In experiment 3, we induced even stronger expectations by presenting the tasks in a fully predictable sequence: search, search, probe, probe, and so on. So participants knew in advance what their next task would be. And we removed search probe trials from these experiments. We first looked at sequences where a search task was followed by a probe task. This is the location priming effect in experiment 1A for comparison. We see that the stronger the expectations that a task would change from search to probe, the smaller the location priming was. It was reduced in experiment 2, and even more reduced in experiment 3, but even then, even when the task change was 100% predictable, location priming was not eliminated. Then we looked at our novel reverse effect, that is, at sequences where a probe task was followed by a search task. We again see that search was faster when a target appeared at a reported letter location than elsewhere, but this effect was similar in all 3 experiments. So on this measure of location priming, task expectation did not reduce the effect. Now, since on average, subjects reported more than 1 letter per trial, it introduces a lot of noise. And this could explain why we found no significant influence of expectations. To summarize for now, we prioritize previously selected locations proactively and inflexibly in line with the traditional location priming account. However, when we do know in advance what the next task will be, this bias is greatly reduced. This means that the bias is more flexible than previously thought, and it is important to note that expectations are not about the location of the target, but are more globally about what the next task will be. So we found that a non-spatial expectation influences a spatial attentional bias. Our next step was to answer the question, what is the mechanism that is responsible for this finding? Here we consider 2 possibilities. One we call proactive attenuation. When we know that the task will change, we reconfigure our task set in advance to prepare for the next trial. This reconfiguration process is well documented in task switching literature. Here we suggest that a byproduct of this reconfiguration is that the enhanced priority boost from previously selected location is reduced before the next trial begins. An alternative that we call proactive retrieval is a variation of an idea recently suggested by Talcott and Gaspelin. It suggests that when we expect a certain task, we retrieve the last encounter with this task and prioritize the location that was selected during this encounter. So when the task changes from the previous trial, there is little or no location priming because the previous trial is not the relevant memory trace. In passing, and to avoid any confusion, many studies have shown that location priming also involves retrieval of the response associated with the previous target. This response-based mechanism is unrelated because here we are talking about a mechanism that proactively guides attention. To test these accounts against each other, we conducted a new experiment. It is part of a related project, and some of the design choices were motivated by additional questions. So I will only explain the aspects of the experiments that are relevant to the current talk. Participants had to search for one of 4 possible targets: a bell pepper, a fire extinguisher, a bottle, or a pear, and to report whether the black bar was above or below the target. The target for the next trial was indicated by a 100% valid pre-queue, so participants could reconfigure the task set in advance when the target identity changed from the previous trial. The 2 accounts makes exactly the same predictions with regard to the previous trial. They both predict that location priming should be smaller when the target identity repeats than when it changes. The proactive attenuation account, because the queue induced participants to reconfigure the task set, which reduces the priority boost at the previously selected location. The proactive retrieval account, because the queue retrieves the memory of a different trial. This is what we found. So we replicated the findings from experiments 2 and 3 with a different manipulation, and again, location priming is reduced when we expect the task to change, but not entirely eliminated. The critical prediction was about the trial before the previous trial, or the n-2 trial. The proactive retrieval accounts predict that the task queue should retrieve the most recent trial with the same task as on the current trial. So location priming should be larger when the target identity repeats than when it changes relative to the n-2 trial. The proactive attenuation account predicts that there should be no difference. This is what we get. So we find a clear location priming effect, but totally independent of the target identity in the n-2 trial. So it supports the proactive attenuation account. To wrap up, I showed that previously selected locations bias your attention proactively before a new event occurs, and whatever this new event is, as Malkovich and Nakayama suggested. However, this is true only when you expect your task to remain the same. When you expect it to change, you reconfigure your task set, and as a byproduct, the attentional bias from previously selected locations are reduced. So we have 2 main take-home messages. The first is that location priming, and possibly intertrial priming in general, is more flexible than previously thought. The second is that task reconfiguration modulates the strength of memory traces on the priority map. So next time that you try to choose a wine at the supermarket, don't worry, the location of the recently selected chocolate bar won't affect you much. I want to thank my advisor, Professor Dominic Lamy, all the Lamy Lab members, and ISF for that. Thank you for listening.
Really nice talk. I really enjoyed it a lot. And those priming effects are huge.
Right.
Big location
Right.
priming effects. So one of the questions I had is the original Malkovich and Nakayama and some of the stuff that I did with Travis Talcott showed that the priming went back quite a ways, but maybe the original Malkovich and Nakayama showed that it went back further than some of the more recent studies.
Right.
Have you looked past trial n-1 to see if you're getting priming from
So we
trials
haven't
further
looked
back?
yet,
Okay.
but here it's a bit of a problem. I mean, in the experiments 1, 2, 3, it's a bit problematic because the task keep changes, and it's a bit difficult to control for the task switching in the n-I.
Yeah.
But we haven't looked past, I think, n-3. I don't think there's an effect in n-3 in this experiment. But yeah, we definitely should look at it. And
Yeah.
the priming of location effect still exists. So for n-I, basically we have a paper that shows that even 15 trials back, you see a location priming effect. So it should exist, but I don't know about the interaction. Probably not.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's thank all our speakers. And a reminder, if it is